Hello, party peoples! I'm gonna help you try and learn some Substance Painter today. Woo! Ah! Hold for applause. Cool, let's get down to business. I'm gonna go ahead and pretend that you know nothing about Substance Painter just so I can go over like the basics and how you do things from the start. Cool. So I'd imagine you'll want to be doing a file, for instance. So basically, whenever you go File New, you get a nice little pop-up window. And I'm gonna go for PBR. Even if I do hand painted ones, I generally still pick the PBR just in case, like occasionally you might actually want to add some metallic or roughness values to things. Alternatively, if you're doing obviously realism or hyperreal, you want PBR anyway. So it's just a good base to start with. Document resolution, I always pick 4K by default, even if you're gonna output something at like 512 or something. I like to always make sure that like I use the highest quality so that if you ever want to like up-res later, you can. Also, things tend to look nicer when you've done it at a higher quality and smushed down than doing it at the lower quality. Normal map, I always use OpenGL just because that's what I've used the most in the games industry. But pretty much the only difference is the normal channel of green is inverted. So it's just pick whatever you like in this instance, really, unless, like, otherwise stated. Cool, I'm gonna pick my very, very crappy little book asset that I made in like 2 seconds today, and I'm gonna hit OK. Basically, you've got some other settings in here, like UDIM, so it will show you each UV tile next to each other, and with only like one material set. So you don't have to like copy materials across. I don't like using UDIMs as much. The only time I really use one is perhaps on like, say, the body and head of a character, just so you don't have to copy the skin to another set. But alternatively, if you don't UDIM it, you can actually copy material sets from one to the other and have them linked. But that's about all I'm gonna go through of that. So cool, book. Very crappy little book asset. Cool, getting around in here, I like to have my screen set up like this. So I've got my asset browser down the bottom, and then I've got my texture set list, so I'm just going to name the material book test. Woo! So there's only one material assigned to this asset, which I can turn on and off, which is fantastic. Woo! Then we've got our texture set settings. So basically everything linked to this asset goes in here, like your normal maps, your ambient occlusions, and all that lovely stuff that we'll get into when we bake this thing. The channels is just saying what you can actually use in the layer stack. So right now we've got all these lovely things. Depending on what shader you actually like pick initially, which was the PBR that I chose. So it comes with all of these by default. If you are missing one, you can always change your shader up in this little lovely shader wall up here, and you can pick a different one. Alternatively, if you're just missing, say you want to have some ambient occlusion in your stack that you want to paint in, you can hit the little plus button and add them in. So then we got our layer stack where we add everything in. I hate it always gives me a paint layer by default. I don't want to paint line. Basically, how I like to start my assets is making a little fill layer. So this will just fill the entire object with whatever I set in my properties tab. So basically, I always want a nice base layer. And this is just me personally. You can put whatever you like as your base layer, but I like to have it at mid-gray, no height, full roughness, so that like it's easier to see like any base color or things, as opposed to it being shiny and it's hard to tell. Metallic off, again for the same viewing reasons as roughness, because we can always add it in if you are metallic inclined. Normal map, again, just base and opacity 1. Occasionally with some things, like an alpha cutout, say you may want to actually have your base as nothing and then add the opacity back in. For this asset, I just want it of 1. And black emissive because I do not want it glowing. So basically, when you have your thing, you want to put some normal map and some ambient occlusion and all that lovely stuff to get you started. So basically, you can either come up here to the lovely croissant, Control-Shift-B, or you can come over here in your texture set settings and hit Bake Mesh Maps. There will be a bunch of stuff in here. The log will most likely chuck hissy fits at you. You can pretty much ignore that unless it tells you that like something didn't work, then investigate. So seeing as we did it in 4K, I'm going to do it in 4K. If you have anything like hyper detailed, like with skin pores and that, you may want to bake in 8K, but generally speaking, I just picked the 4K. Especially for this book, there's nothing that special going down in Chinatown. Cool. So here is my high poly I made earlier. Now, basically, you load your meshes in here. If you have multiple meshes, you can have them with suffixes of high and low, and it should do it per each asset. I am personally quite funny, and I like to bake individual assets separately to everything so that I don't get any conflicting behaviors, but that's just me. Basically, you can input a cage file for this. I'm going to do that in a second and you'll see why. But when you import your high poly, it will sort of expand your low poly around it. So you'll see it's all in blue because it fits pretty well. But if I was to slide this back, the red, it tells you where obviously it's not got the cage around it and it won't bake any of that detail in. So you always want to make sure that you've got no red seeing on your screen. Cool. You can also uncheck average normals and basically it just rounds out. It's just a new feature that rounds out all of your surfaces. So it all looks blue. It all looks great. I'm just going to do a little normal bake just to show you what's going to happen. So I'm going to bake and ooh, it missed some information around here. So basically, it's not the frontal distance because it's all in blue. It's the rear distance. So you just increase it a little bit and try again, and nope. I know that it's going to keep doing this to me, but like if it keeps happening, you can keep increasing it. And then if it's doing bad things now. So if it's still doing bad things, you can always make your own cage. Now I do have one I made earlier. Boop. And I'll show you how I did that. So basically, in Maya, we have our low poly and our high poly. What you want to do is you want to duplicate your low poly and just not do that on the high poly. You just want to select all your vertices, and generally speaking, this can be done in one motion, but you may need to play with the verts. Your cage does have some stipulations. It has to be the exact same UV unwrap as your low poly. Otherwise it won't work because it's literally projecting through this one onto your low poly UVs. So if it's not one-to-one, it won't work. So pretty much I'm just going to expand this the same way it would in Substance Painter. Cool, and that all seems nice. It encompasses the high poly. And basically if, say, there was still something poking out of the top, you can add to it. So I can go and add in a little thing here and pull this up if it was still peeking through. The one thing you want to be careful of is to not like drag it around too ridiculously and create geometry like where the pop out is happening, because otherwise it will stretch the map in a similar way to how the UVs are stretched. So basically I made one like this earlier and went and imported into Substance. And now we got my nice cage file and we'll just do a quick bake to see, and beautiful. So basically the cage wasn't going far, the one that Substance did wasn't going far enough back. So when I did my cage file, it tends to not have a limit on how far back the rear view is. So sometimes you'll need to make a cage, sometimes you won't. It really depends on the asset, is one of those things. So cool, now I know that's working. I'm going to check all these options. And basically, your normal is just going to make your standard normal map. Your world space normal is for Substance Painter, and it will basically tell you where the object is in the world, and it uses this for generators. So things like moss and that, say it's like sat at the top of something, it will basically use that to generate where the top of the object is. A similar thing happens for the position. It's a much more in-depth version of that. The world space is just where it's up, down, left, right in relation to the world. The position is in relation to other objects. So say I had like 5 more books stacked on top of this. It will essentially say that this is the bottom going to the top in a gradient, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So that's your world space and your position. Your ID map, you have a few options for this. So vertex color, you can paint vertex color in Maya, Blender, I think Max. Most 3D programs you can put vertex color on a thing. So material color, again, I've assigned 2 Lamberts to this, so for the pages and for the cover. So I'm going to be picking this one. You can also do file ID, which I very rarely use. You can also do mesh ID or polygroup. So if you say this book was made up of 2 separate objects of the cover and then the pages in the high poly, you could pick that one and it would give you 2 different colors based on that. But we're just going to pick material. The ambient occlusion, if you want very pretty AOs and things, you wham that up high because lovely. But you want to be careful because it will make it take longer. And if you only have like a little bit of high poly geo, like this isn't very dense, you may want to smooth like that out a couple of times. That is horrible. Don't look at the wireframe. Cool. And obviously the ambient just gets all the little close together objects in the scene. So say you put your fingers together, the lines in between your fingers is ambient occlusion in a very quick rundown. Your curvature, you will also want to smack up your rays. Position we talked about, and the thickness. So basically it talks about like how thick an object is, but also if you had, say, again, the 5 more books stacked on here, it wouldn't be as thick. It would be thicker in the middle and not so much on the outsides. And that also is used for like generators and things. So cool. I'm gonna bake this amazingly wonderful asset that I totally didn't do in like 2 minutes. And listen to the soothing sounds of baking. Cute. So basically I'm gonna go through and show you what all those maps look like. So up here, you've got a bunch of different options to see a bunch of different things. So you can look at your object as a whole, material with your lighting. You can also go through single channels of base color, and if you press C, it will cycle through these. So height, roughness, metallic, normal, opacity, emissive, and your normal height mesh. And basically we'll just keep going through this. Also, if you have any masks, C will work for masks. And if you want to ever head back to material, you press M, or you can go drop down, whatever you want. If you want to see the mesh maps, which is what's in your texture set settings window, you can go through here. I don't actually know if there's a shortcut for these ones too. I wonder if C works. C does not work for that. Cool, so basically these are what it kicked out earlier. So there's a normal, there's the world space normal, so it's telling you where it is in position to the world, what's down, what's up, all of that, left, right. And then we got our ID map. So I assigned 2 Lamberts to this into the high poly in Maya, and I got my IDs, which is blinding. The ambient occlusion. So see how the pages are quite close together to the edge of the book, so it just creates that little dark shadow spot that makes everything look nice. The curvature, so it highlights all the edges and all the cavities as well. Then we've got the position, so it's just saying what is left, right, up, down of this object, just in relation to the objects in here, not in relation to the scene, which is a world space. And then we got thickness, so the cover's obviously thicker than the pages because they stick out a little bit. So you just get, obviously this is the thickest point of the book, and the edges taper off. And that one again is for generating maps and masks and things. And I'm gonna go back to material. Cute. So basically, that is baking. Alternatively, if you don't have a high poly mesh, you can use the low poly as a high poly mesh if you want. Cool, go back over here now. And yep. So if you hover over them, they do tell you that they've got all their F numbers and that assigned to painting an array. So to get around these windows, if you want to ever view something in full screen, it is tab. And if you want to get out of that, again, it's tab. And if you want to cycle through 3D only, 2D only, and 2D 3D, F1 is for both, F2 is for 3D, and F3 is for 2D. Sorry, F2 is for 3D. And then F3 is for 2D. And then F1 obviously gets you back, and you can tab, and that works with those as well. You'll oftentimes want to paint only in 3D or only in 2D for certain things, and sometimes you want to see both. Cool. So that is that. I'm gonna just go ahead and start making some just random layers on this thing. Cool, so it's looking bland at the moment. It's just got a full gray base color. So I'm gonna add in a new fill layer, which is just this little paint pot over here. And basically, I don't want any of this junk on it, I just want color. So if you hold left alt and click, you just get the color node on there. Alternatively, you can left alt and click again, and you get all the options. So I actually pick this brown, have a nice brown book, which will conflict with the pages. So back up, we're going green. So I have that as my base color, and I'm gonna make it a little bit darker. So when you're using colors in games, I'm assuming movies as well, is you pretty much never want to use this 10% at the very top and at the very bottom. So nothing will ever be pure black in a game, with a rare few exceptions of, say this asset, they wanted a hole in the middle of the book. You might happen to use pure black just to generate a hole so it looks like there's nothing there. But that is the only use case, really speaking. If you're making just an object that is black, you'll want to be in the 10% margin, and oftentimes you'll probably want a little bit of color seeping in on that as well. Yeah. And the color will obviously depend on the object and whether you want something warm, cold, that sort of jazz. So cool, I want this lovely dark green book. So that's what I want as my base color. Also, name as you go. I don't always do that. Then I want to apply the ambient occlusion as a color. So basically, I'm gonna pick my lovely green and make it a little bit darker and a little bit more in the yellow. Now I want to put my ambient occlusion that I just baked as a mask. Now you can do that by adding essentially a black mask with a fill node, because we want to fill it with our texture. But if you want a quicker way of getting that, if you just if you right click on the layer and go bitmap mask and just select any random junk, it will already make your black mask for the fill layer, so it's just easier to pick that way. So basically down here, I want my ambient occlusion from my texture sets. So you could either pick that when you go here, and you can type it in and pick it that way, or you can come to the fill node, you can go to the texture tab, and because it's linked to my project and I don't want to scroll through 50,000 textures to find the one I want, if you go project, it will have all of your baked maps in here. So I'm just going to drag that one even though it's there. Cool. So that is doing the opposite of what I wanted. I wanted it darker in the corners. So basically we're just going to come here and invert the mask. Lovely. So that is just doing what I want. And then basically I just generally speaking go from here and slowly, for a hand painted asset that is, for a PBR it's quite similar, and I'll show you a better scene for that. But just while we're learning, I'll just go through a hand painted asset. So I want some curvature. On here I want the edges highlighted and it to look nice. So I'm just gonna add my bitmap mask again and just be lazy and pick my curvature. Cool. So if you ever want to see what the mask is, if you press C, you can cycle through up here until you get to the mask. So this is one-to-one the curvature that I've just plugged in. So because I don't want any gray or like half this layer, so I just want to add in a levels node. So if you right click on your mask, not on your layer, because you can add these to layers too, right click on your mask, add the levels node. So basically, you've got a few ways you can do this. You can work the same as it would in Photoshop. You can crush the blacks in, you can pump up the whites, and do much the same with these ones as well. So this will lower the white value as a whole and lower the black value as a whole. The gray one in the middle will input the gamma so that you can, as a whole, sort of go up and down in between, and this is very good for cleaning out these sorts of grays. But I'm just going to pull in the black values, but I don't want it seeping into these so much. So as I'm pulling them in, you can see it's shrinking it. So I'm just going to use this just to take that out ever so slightly and pull my white values back. So cool, I've got that. And now if we press C, we can go to the base color. First of all, I would like a dusty green of this base color, so I'm just gonna use my little eyedropper. I'm gonna go into the green yellow value again and just pick something up ever so slightly, and probably a little bit more to the dusty range. You most likely never want curvature like this, depending on what you're going for, like if it's cel shaded or something like that, but more often than not, you won't want your curvature as straight lines. Cool. How do you do that, you might ask? Well, I'm gonna show you, whether you like it or not. So basically on your mask again, because we want to do this in the mask, right click, and there's a whole bunch of things you can do. This is just the quickest way for doing this. Alternatively, you can hand paint this, which will always give better result. But this is just for speed. So I'd add a fill node. And I'm actually going to come to the all libraries over here. And I'm just going to pick something. And Neil is home. Hello. And we're back. Cool. So for the curvature, we added a new fill node. And my go-to, oh, you can also add them through this bar as well. My go-to is the clouds. It just has a good modeled effect, and essentially we're going to use this to remove from our curvature. So right now it's just over the top of it, and we basically want to pick a blend mode that will remove it. So if we hit on the norm, you'll see we've got a bunch of different blend options, same as Photoshop. So we want to subtract this from the curvature, and as you can see, stuff has started happening. So this line is no longer full. But we still got some pretty sick lines, so I want to basically come here, go into my mask, and we will edit from there. So cool, so when you add the clouds, it gives a bunch of different options in here, and by that I mean you get 4 sliders. So basically, I'm going to up the contrast a bit more. You can see it's starting to bring in some of those lines that were just a bit too far gone. I also want to scale it down a little bit because it was a little too big. I want some smaller breaks in my lines. And then you can also add noise to it as well. So you can scale the noise up and down as you please. Pretty much you'll never whack on one of these textures and have it be perfect. You will always need to play with them until you get it how you like it. Basically, I'm just gonna find that, and I'm pretty happy with that. I like that. It's cool. It highlights the edges, but it's not too perfect. And I'm gonna hit C and go back to my base color. Ooh, it still looks boring. Cool. So I'm gonna add. Neil, stop laughing. I'm now gonna add a new mask in here with a new fill layer. I'm gonna pick up my normal map this time. So I'm gonna go to my project. I'm gonna put the normal map in there. And see, it does some interesting things. But I specifically want the green channel from this. Now, in this option, it doesn't let me pick it. So I'm going to show you a very awesome thing called anchor points. So to do this, I'm just going to make a new fill layer right at the bottom of my stack. Just left alt on the normal. And I'm going to plug my normal map in. Also, and I'm going to call this normal. Cool. So if you ever get in a problem like this where you want to use the red, the green, or the blue channel of your normal map, you can use an anchor point. So what that does is it basically pulls all data from that layer and you can put it anywhere on anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my anchor point. I'm just going to name it ACH for my anchor. Cool, so basically my normal map's in the normal channel and it's anchor pointed now. So now when I go back to this layer and I have my fill node, when you click on here, there's a new tab now, which is anchor points. So I'm going to pick that and it will highlight the layer that is associated with that anchor point. So cool, I want that. Now basically my normal map's in the normal channel, so the reference channel, I want it to be normal. And look, we've got things happening. Ooh. So just going into my mask, I'm going to, so keep alpha and extract alpha are actually pretty good. So say you've got a PNG sticker or something that you want that's got transparency everywhere else. You may want to just extract where the alpha is of that thing. Seeing as this channel is absolutely full, there's no point, I want to keep the alpha. So now, in this levels section, you'll see we got colors because it's in the normal channel and it's not black and white, even though the mask is being converted to black and white. So I'm literally just going to pick the red channel and I'm going to like sploot that away. And then I'm going to pick the blue channel and I'm going to do the same thing. Green channel, I want to almost go there, and then I want to invert the mask. Cool. See, we've got some weird things going on. And pick my color again. Pretty happy with that, aside from the odd there, but I'll explain why that's happening. Basically, it's adding some lighting information in on this through the normal map. And what we want to do is on my mask. So it's adding the information in here based off the lighting, but because this bit is quite a harsh corner, and it's doing that because that's where the UVs are cut. And see the different angles that they don't correspond and the UV points don't line up, it means that it will have a harsh cut on this where the normal was baking. Now you'll run into this problem in things like shoes and that. You can never have like a perfect straight thing, you'll always want them at a 45, but if you can, you want to generally match the same angle of things if you don't want this sort of thing to become a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'll fix that up through a paint layer. So I'm going to make a little paint layer. Now, it's not like film mode, so it's just empty. There's no information on it. It's just paint. How I like to do this is rather than painting on the paint layer, I like to add a paint layer to the paint layer. So you can turn it on and off. You can blend it with the different things, and you can turn this, the opacity of it, up and down separate to the main layer. And this is super handy because it means that you can actually cut and then go and paste it onto a new layer. And you can copy and paste them too. I like to use this for masks. So I'll generally make a mask layer. I'll call it masks, and then I'll name each one of these so that you can literally just copy and paste them down to your masks. Now, any paint layers you do on a paint layer or a fill layer, you cannot transfer to the mask. Any paint layers you do on the mask, you cannot transfer to the color, so just be aware of that. So I'm just going to come into my paint layer. I'm going to use my little eyedropper tool to eyedropper the one I want. I'm going to go to my brushes now. And the annoying thing after Adobe took this over is it doesn't reset this. So also come out of that to all libraries. And use my favorite brush. I'm just going to use my cement tube. Make it a little smaller. Turn the opacity down. This one will do pen pressure for your opacity. This one will do pen pressure for size. I'm just going to come down here and just paint this in until I get like a seamless blend that I'm happy with. Turn the opacity up a little more. And if that's not going quick enough, you can always use the mouse. And this is very, very slowly happening. Yeah. It is doing things, but it's taking its time. Alternatively, if you don't like the painting option, you can also do this with a fill mode. And you can just select the color of that layer and paint exactly the same as I was doing, but on the mask. So it's gone a little quicker this time, but the only problem about this one is you don't get to have multiple colors blending into this. Now what I'm doing is I'm using X to flip between full white and full black on my paintbrush. Now the options, I normally keep this way up here. The options for this, if you scroll down in properties, you'll see this grayscale for the masking. Now alternatively, and if I hit X, it will cycle between black and white. Alternatively, if you have it, say, in the middle, and you hit X, it will cycle through the middle. I personally like to fully do masks in black and white so that you can then go and move the opacity slider down if you want it like that. Just saves for tweaking later. So cool, so I have done that. I'm going to change color a little bit to try and hopefully blend a bit more with this lovely layer that is going down. And Neil is staring at me now. And obviously take heaps more time doing that. I'm like not even taking remotely the amount of time this is needed to finesse this. But you get the point, you can paint the corners in and out where you have seams. Alternatively, if you have a seam, you can also do a fun thing of smudging. So with the smudge brush, it only works on a paint layer. You can add a paint to a fill layer and do it this way, but if you're literally just doing a smudge, you can do it on this. Now you want to set it to pass through. Essentially what pass through does is, because this layer is at the top of the stack, it's going to pass through all of these layers, collecting just for the base color and you'll see the swatch is pretty much everything that I painted on this book combined into one color. So I'm gonna do what I normally do and add a paint node on top of this, and I call it Smudge. And I want to pick my lovely little smudge tool over here. So I'm pretty sure these brushes are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you want to cycle through them, you can go through. So I want Smudge. Now you can change this brush as well, so you can always pick different sizes. The brush resizes in Photoshop with the arrow, the solid brackets. You can alternatively right click and change the size and all the brush settings in here and there. But my one's normally over here, so if I do want to change the size, it's there. So I'm just going to resize it. And should probably just use the standard brush for this so it's more obvious. It is not passing through. Wait, no pass through. It's not, because if you do a new one, the layer also needs to be set for pass through. There we go. Cool. And basically what that's doing is it's smudging between the two sides. Now, most of the time on the seams, you will get stuff like these little tiny artifacts coming along. So you can't always use this to fix up the seams. But generally what it's doing is it's passing through all of these layers, so curvature and all our normal map, and it just allows you to smudge through that. Cool. It is handy. Alternatively as well, on things set to like pass through, if I wanted to change the color of everything and I didn't want to change each of these layers, you right click and you add filter, and you select in your filter tab, you have HSL perspective. You can go in and play around with like the hue, saturation, and like the brightness. And that will need to be on pass through, but it doesn't have to be a paint layer, it can be a fill layer with nothing on it set to pass through as well. Just as long as it's set to pass through. Cool. Bin that now, because I don't want to use that in this example. So another cool thing to do might be to add some thickness to this. We come in here and we go to thickness. Pretty much do what I was doing the dusky yellow one before. And I'm just going to pull that layer down a bit so the edges are a little dusky. But I also want to go one step further, and I want to add a bit of a gradient to this. So I'm actually going to come into my mask again and add another fill. And then if you come here and find gradient, now see that in the mask I have a gradient. So just want it on the top and bottom. So I'm going to put that like this. I don't want it repeating up because I just want it on the top and the bottom. So if you kind of UV wrap and you go repeat none, we'll only have it where you want it. Now I also want to add it, so I'm going to go in the blending option because I don't want it overriding the thickness. I want it adding to it. So if you go to linear dodge add, and multiply, I get these confused all the time. So linear dodge will add white to the thing. So it's adding this white gradient into there, whereas I actually want to multiply in this case. So it's just multiplying the result of the thickness. So it's going to reduce it towards the end. Because it's doing that, I want to invert because I want it wider on the end. I'm just going to pull that up and maybe change it to the top bottom gradient. Lift that up and invert that so that the tips are wider than the midsection. Cool, back to the color. pretty much gave me what I wanted. Cool. So I'm gonna do something about the pages. So I'm gonna add my fill layer, and I'm gonna go and pick a little beige. I'm gonna say about this is a 10. I'm happy with my book pages. Now I did make a mask earlier using the material ID. So I'm just going to show you how you use that. So if you go right click, add mask with color selection. There's color selection. And it's on white at the moment because we want to pick with this. So I'm going to pick a color and I'm going to pick green. Now these masks always come out like this and it's bad. It just looks bad. It's all pixely. And if I add a paint node to this, in here and I draw a line next to it, that's why it's bad, because it's got more information. Like, I can make a smoother line than this. You can play with the tolerance, but it doesn't always, and the hardness, and it doesn't always give you what you want. So a way to fix up this pixel edge, if you do still want to keep with this mask and not hand paint it by yourself, add a filter, and you want a blur node, and you don't want to blur it that much, you just want to blur it enough that you see the pixels go away. Now if you add a levels node to that, I want to pull in the black section a little bit and push out the white. Pull in, my blur wasn't strong enough because you can still see those steps, so I'm just going to increase that ever so slightly. Now, the one bad thing about blur nodes is it blurs across the UV tile. So if there's a seam there, you might get a little bit funny on the seams. But see, it's still not perfect. And for most cases, I pretty much just hand paint any masks because of it, because I find it quicker and easier. But that is a good in a pinch if you do color select. Obviously, you have to play with it heaps more in order to get it to look nice, but I'm essentially gonna go through and give this the same treatment that I did with that's not what I wanted. With the book, I'm gonna add in like ambient, invert that mask. I'm gonna pick the peach layer that I got, and I'm gonna make that darker for the ambient. And I'm gonna hit multiply. Just check what that's doing. And I'm gonna add color selection. So rather than add mask with color selection, because that will remove my mask, I'm gonna add a color selection, and I'm gonna pick, I don't want it there. Cool. Alternatively, we could just add a folder. We could copy this mask over. So you've got to right click on the mask itself, copy mask, and right click on the folder, paste into mask, and it will just add your mask up there. So I'm going to remove all this lovely stuff, and I'm going to shove this into that folder. Nice. I'm probably going to go a little darker on that, and level this out a little more, just so it pops a little. There we go. That looks nice. Oof. Nice. Cool. Now it's bland as hell, and I do not want that. I want some page inference. So I'm gonna use this and do another bitmap mask, surprisingly. And I'm gonna come to my textures, and there's this cool anisotropic noise. I'm gonna drag that on there because it looks sort of book shaped. Alternatively, you can use like the creased one. So I might use the creased. I'll rotate it 90 because I know that it's coming in the wrong way. And just smush, 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 smush this down, get it to where about you think looks pagey. Then you can start playing with these attributes. So I'm just gonna, I don't want it that crazy. Some more contrast to it. That's extra nice and pagey. Get it to where you're happy with it. Quite happy with it. I don't want any warp on it. There. And this is gonna, I know this is gonna do what I want it to do because I'm just gonna hit multiply. And then I have some pages. Woo! I'm pretty happy with that. It's just doing the inference of what I want it to do. Now I'm just gonna turn my layer down a little bit. And I'm happy with my pages. Cool. And basically you just sort of go through that and go from there. Alternatively, rather than doing it this way, you can, if I add in a paint layer and I add a generator and I add in a gradient, and we got a gradient in there, you can play with the settings on this and get it how you like it. And then if you add a new one, set it to pass through, add a generator, and this time wait for the autosave. This one, this red black square, if we add this gradient, we're going to be using the one below to generate color. So cool. Color 1, I'm thinking about red book. I'm going to just add blue and yellow just to highlight, that's gross yellow, teal, to highlight what's happening with it. So you can have minimum of 2 colors and maximum of 10. I do not want that many. So you use the position, and this is going to basically use the position we baked out earlier in order to figure out where the position of the gradient goes. It will work on a better asset on this because it's not picking up what I'm putting down. Cool, and it wants to make a fool out of me. Cool beans. So I was being an idiot with this gradient because I haven't used one in ages. Oops. So basically I just put the ambient occlusion as like a base gradient on my thing. And if you add a paint layer and set it to pass through, and we go right click and it's a filter, and you hit the gradient out of the filter. And then basically from that, it looks exactly the same because it's using the same colors. So if we go red, and then I pick a blue, and now a purple. So you'll see it's actually working this time. Smart, Alice. Remember all the things. Cool. So you can change the positions of the color based on the black and whites. So you can play around with where you want the colors to be and like what position you want them. So just pretty much just play with it till you're happy with the effect. But that's basically how you use a gradient, and it will basically just on pass through with the filter attached. It's passing through and it's using this, and I just plugged in an ambient occlusion generator, and you can mess with that as well, and this will update with it. Alternatively, you can also just add in, like, say, your curvature, and it will do it based off whatever is passing through below it. Cool. I'm gonna show you one more thing before we move on. So basically, I'm gonna come in here and add a black mask, and I'm gonna actually come and use this little doohickey. Now, this allows you to either pick by triangle on your mesh to mask it. So you can either pick by triangle, you can pick by poly, or you can pick by object. And also you can pick by UV shell. So if, say, for example, I pick this and I pick a couple polys here and there to remove, you can update your project at any time, but generally speaking, if you use this masking system over painting, if you say add or remove polys from here, even though it's the same UV, because the geometry's changed, the geometry mask will most likely change. So if we just went edit project configuration, this is how you change your model. And we just go select and book and ribbon. Cool, open that. Now preserve strokes will generally speaking preserve your paint strokes. So they'll stay the same. If I add this in, okay, it's making a fool out of me. Sometimes it will change this. So if, because I didn't actually change the book's geometry. That would be why. So if we add the extra one in, see, because it's got extra geometry, it's ruined the geometry masks. Now it doesn't understand because we got extra polys in the actual object itself. So generally speaking, paint on the mask will remain, but geometry masks won't. So if you ever run into that issue and say you have your mask and you want to save this before changing to the lower geometry, you can always right click on your mask and export mask to file. Then you just pick where it's saving to and you can bring it back in. So if you want to bring it back in, essentially, if I open what is Cool Bloop, oh yes, Cool Bloop I made earlier. If you say wanted to import that into here, you just click and drag from your file explorer, pull it in here. It will ask you if you want a prefix, so essentially if you type the prefix in, it will like find it a lot faster. So you can say separate them out by like wood, texture, roughness, all that lovely stuff. So it's unidentified, so we got to pick what we want this resource to come in as. So it's texture, I want it to be a texture. I don't want it to go to my library for this example because that will stay with Substance Painter. You'll have that in your library every single time you open your scene. You can have it to the current session, so it won't save with your project. So if you save it, it won't save the resource with it. It will still be in your layer stack, but it won't save it. When you open up the project, it will be gone from here. I'm going to hit project because I want it to stay with this project and import. And you have your random cool bloop now that you can just go and be like, ooh, cool bloop. So that's essentially how you would import your mask. You pull it in as a texture. If you want custom brush settings on here, on any of these brushes, they will only accept an alpha. So just remember that they'll only accept something flagged as an alpha in those import settings. Cool. So essentially, that was stage 1. Stage 2 is, here's one I made earlier, like Blue Peter. Woo! Spent more time on this one than the other one. Still super quick. But let's deep dive in here. So cool. So I've made this like cool little layer stacky thing. And basically, I'm using the anchor points that I showed you earlier in order to separate out all of my things. So I've put my normal map in here. So this is where I'm plugging all my bakes in here rather than using them straight out of the layer stack, the texture set setting, sorry. So I pulled my normal map in here and I made a fill layer. And basically I filled it with the normal map. So I've converted the normal map into here and I've just picked my my blue. And this is my normal map blue. And then I've essentially done the same thing with the green. I've brought in the green channel using a grayscale conversion generator. I've sourced the normal map and I've just chosen the green channel. And I've leveled it out to make it how I like it. And essentially the same. In the lighting, it's just a grey colour, but on the lighting, just added a bunch of lights. These use the position, and you can change like the angles and things. I'm not going to change that. It's going to change the textures. But you basically, it's lit from all angles, and it's leveled out to make it look more appealing. So if I go on the mask, I can show you. So basically, it's just like the object has been lit top down, just to help aid in our textures. And then we've got the red, we got the AO, and again, these are all just plugged straight into the fill nodes, curvature, and thickness. And I've just named all of the anchor points for those, and again, like before, the base gray. So cool, they all go here, and they're all being referenced in here. So if I come into the, break it down one by one, if I come into the cover here, I've got a few things going on. So like before, we got a standard base color, and then I've added the dusty edge because it's an old book. You need a dusty edge. And then I've added in my colored AO in the thing. And how I've added edge gradient, like before, I imported a gradient and just pushed it around till I felt happy with it. The AO was a little different this time. Rather than filling it straight up with the ambient dragging and dropping in here, I've come in here like before, picked anchor points with the Bakes AO, and that's how I've picked it in this time rather than dragging and dropping, because it's essentially down here. I've then gone and leveled it because I want it inverted, and then I've played with the levels some more to actually enhance. So inverted and enhanced these edges a little bit because I wanted it to come on a little stronger. Pulled in the same curvature, and I have not followed my own rule set by adding my clouds in here. How dare I? Again, you can use anything to add dissonance to the curvature. Oh, that's why I haven't added it. I'll add it up later. I added some color variation. So what I can do is I can add a new one in there because I do want some dissonance before I get to my color variation. I can add the bog standard red that I had to even it out. I'm going to add in my bitmap mask. And this time I'm going to draw from my anchor point because I got my curvature in there. Cool, and that looks like it's pretty much zeroing it out. Cloudy clouds, and subtract, level these out, I'm just gonna blur this a little bit because I think it needs a little bit of blur, not too much, just a little. Cool, I'm happy with that. Breaks it up ever so slightly from those edges. And I got and added in a color variation using I've just got a random swirly texture I put on there. They're just free things I've downloaded, and I've essentially blurred and then warped it to add a little bit of oil stains to it. I've then gone and specifically pulled the green channel just to add that lighting information into it. And then I've added in the thickness and I've lightened it up. And then it is not looking right because I messed with the lights, I'm pretty sure. How dare I mess with the lights? I'm just gonna make this a little darker now, seeing as I have ruined it. Ah. Cool. It is tinting, so I'm gonna want a little bit of a subtle tint. Make base color a little bit darker. Cool. essentially you'll just be like playing around with all of these. Nothing will ever be perfect, like I said before, first try, so I'm happy with that. Here is my label I made earlier for this thing as well. So essentially, this one is only made up of 3 layers. So my very bad mask of the base of my label. I had a gold trim around it. Now, with the gold trim, it's made up of a bunch of these little alphas. So they are just found in the alphas. I just picked one of these random ones. And then I added them in and resized them, rehomed them to the 4 corners where I like them. Then I just added a paint in to go around all the edges. Cool, but it's looking a little bland and I want it to be gold and indicate shininess. So I just added a little highlight. It's a little highlight just to take it away from being super flat and just to show that there is lighting here. So essentially I divided it with just a gray because I know that obviously I don't want it pure white, but it would just add that little subtle highlight when I pull the opacity down. Cool. Then we also have some funky things going on with the edgeware. Ooh, pretty. So essentially, this is a neat thing that I made up. So it's got a main layer, a dark layer, which you can see right behind that, and it's got a lighter layer. So essentially it's just trying to mimic depth in the thing. So how I went about doing it is I found what I wanted it to look like the cardboard when you peel back an old book at the side. How I've set it up is, first of all, it's paint layer. So this is where you go and paint it on. And you make the shapes roughly how you want them to be. I've then gone and added a blur slope to add those sort of little flecks and tears. So basically, I've just added a blur slope node and just played around with the intensity. So that's nothing, and then just played around with it to get it to how I like it, all nice and crisp. There's the intensity slider that you can play with, but there's also how much it's multiplied by. So depending on the size of your object, you may need 100 or 1,000 to get it to look like I had it with the 10 back here. And then we've just added in an anchor point because we want to essentially pinch this to copy underneath and on top for the dark. So I've done just that for the dark. So it's only made up of 2 layers. There's no new information on this. So we literally fill it with the layer from previous. We offset it. So as you can see over here, there's a very slight offset. So it's come in, show you the thing. So to get it, I've added a fill node, pulled that anchor point in, and it's 1-to-1. And then I've just gone very subtly and added in a little shadow to it down that way. And then I've essentially added the same fill node back, no offset, and subtracting it, so you get that little dark edging around. And the same thing with the light, but in reverse. So I've pulled it up and off to the side, and then multiplied it from itself rather than subtracting. And you get that little neat edgeware. I also love doing things in sets of 3, so generally speaking, if I have something like this, I'll have a light, dark, and then the actual tone that I wanted in the first place. But you can just sort of play around with your offsets, find out what works for you, like different thicknesses if you want the cardboard to seem really thick and that. And just how toony you want it, really. But that's like chaining them together. So essentially, when I come in here and I paint in here now, actually paint with the paint feature, I can make my brush a little bigger and I can just paint these in now. So you can just paint that wherever you want on the book, but it will make the edge square. And then the pages, what I was showing you before with the, so I've got the base of it, added a lighting pass. I've inversed the lighting because I wanted it a little bit, just very subtle. I've used the blue normal map and it's pulled out my corners. I've then gone and added the thickness, which has brought some life back into it. Added the little pages in there, and then I put some AO in there just to add that to it. And I think it's a little bit too light now, so I'm just gonna go there. And slowly bring this down. I'm happy with that. That looks neat. And then I made a cute little ribbon for it. Na-na! So I wanted it to look roughly like it was silk. This was done very quickly in Hodgepodge. But I made a gradient in Photoshop, just a color gradient. You could do that in here, but I just made it in Photoshop. And then I've come in here and I've added a bunch of fill nodes with just straight thick lines. And I've gone through, filled them in, and then just with a paint node, removed the edges. I've then gone and painted in this amazingly artistic squiggle of highlight and bled it out. And done the same thing with a medium layer and a lighter layer. And basically I've divided them all because they're all just grey, but I've divided them with the gradient in order to make them go a bit lighter. And that is my crappy book. Woo! Fantastic, she showed us substance.